Production assistance for Jim Barnett's Gotta Go, provided by and by
I'm Cindy Winkler of Peoria Charter Coach. Trust our family's 72 years of experience to get you to the Chicago airports or Bloomington Airport 4 times daily from Peoria and Normal. Relax in luxury. Enjoy the free Wi-Fi. Welcome aboard.
and by
Calvin Mayer, the finest import automobile service in Peoria.
and
Diabetes has been called a silent epidemic. It's time we call it out for exactly what it is. Very serious disease that has to be stopped. This is Brett Michaels. Join us. Choose to share, act, learn, and give. Help us stop diabetes.
Hi, I'm Jim Barnett. My mom used to say I was born with my motor running. I love to be on the go. I'm on a mission to check out as many interesting places and as many interesting people as I can. And along the way, I want to see who's got the best food. Hey, you're welcome to ride along, but I gotta go. We're pulling into Gulf Shores, Alabama, which is like a sister city to Orange Beach, Alabama, because they're right next to each other and they have so much in common when it comes to tourism and their economies and all. They both sit right on the Gulf of Mexico, right on the Gulf Coast, and they share 32 miles of what they call sugar white sand, and it is too. It actually drifts across the highway just like snow does up north. Some people call this part of the Redneck Riviera. And when you go to the east past Orange Beach, then you start to get into Florida, and of course it circles on to the south along the Gulf Coast. But beautiful so far. Let's go check it out. One of the first things you notice about this area is that there's water everywhere. Would you believe 400,000 acres of protected water? You've got Oyster Bay and Little Lagoon and the Intracoastal Waterway. This is what's called Lake Shelby. It's actually located inside the Gulf State Park. A couple of locals are trying to tell me that it's okay to swim in there. They also say there's a sucker born every second. Then there's Perdido Pass, Old River, and Cotton Bayou. Okay, over that away you got Mobile Bay, that's to the west. And over this way, to the east, you've got Bon Secure Bay. Between you and me, looks like the same water. Then, of course, we've got Wolf Bay, Bay LaLanche, Arnica Bay, St. John Bay. Well, we can't leave this one out, the Gulf of Mexico. Don't call it an ocean, by the way. They'll correct you for that. It has a huge impact on their economy and on the history of this area. Our list of waterways could really go on, but trust me, we don't have enough time for that. Keep this in mind, though. The two cities, Gulf Shores and Orange Beach, actually sit on an island, a 27,000-acre island. When you were a kid here, before the roads were built, you didn't learn how to drive, you learned how to row. Every one of those bodies of water has some significance, either in local history or the local economy today. Sometimes both. A lot of the oldest local history comes from this spot. It's called Little Lagoon. It's not so little, 9 miles long by a half-mile wide. Even though there's research to indicate that Paleo-Indians were in this area 11,000 years ago, a lot of the recorded history involves the settlers right here around Little Lagoon. I had a great conversation with Joy Robinson, a local historian. She told me that most of the earliest Anglo-Saxon settlers actually came from North Carolina, and everyone was involved in fishing. Even though there's not much fishing on Little Lagoon today, the rich fishing history is felt everywhere. There's even a small number of boat builders who continue to make a living in the area. Joe Buskins, whose family has built boats for generations, gave us a little boat building lesson.
This is what we call a half model. It's actually accurate dimensionally. You can take a scale ruler and measure dimensions off of it, and you're able to translate that into larger dimensions and build a full-scale boat out of it. And these are little patterns that we've made that actually mirror the hull sides, And then we can take a piece like this and translate that into how a sheet of plywood would bend around the form.
Well, you know what they say, the proof's in the pudding, and I can tell you that Joe's boats are beautiful. That's why people from miles around call him for new boats and for their boat repairs. Okay, so back to all this water around Gulf Shores and Orange Beach. This next one is a biggie. No, not the really big one, we'll get to that, but this one is big. Around here, most people call it the canal. Officially, it's the Intracoastal Waterway. Locally, it runs through Arnica Bay, Bay La Launch, Wolf Bay, Oyster Bay, Bon Secure Bay, and Mobile Bay. Actually, the Intracoastal Waterway here is just a small part of the National Intracoastal Waterway System. It's a 3,000-mile system of rivers, bays, and man-made canals that run all along the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. It allows for boats to operate without the hazards of being out at sea. And because the Corps of Engineers tries to maintain at least a 12-foot depth, it allows for barges to transport petroleum, food, and building materials in protected waters. That protection can be from the natural dangers of the open sea, or it can be protection in times of war. During World War II, German submarines were always trying to sink merchant ships along the East Coast. During my talks with local historians, they mentioned German submarine sightings right here along the Alabama coast. Speaking of war, well, in a geographical sense that is, people have fought over this water for centuries. It's Mobile Bay, and it's an internationally significant port. It lies just to the west of Gulf Shores. The water from 6 different rivers drains here at a rate of 62,000 cubic feet per second. I mentioned we're talking about water here, right? Okay, at that rate, it's the largest estuary in the United States. It's 31 miles long and has a surface area of over 400 square feet. Would you believe, though, its average depth is only 10 feet? Well, except in the shipping lanes that drop down to about 75 feet. There's a lot of maritime and military history here. In fact, there's several Civil War shipwrecks sitting on the bottom of the bay. Hey, while we're checking out Mobile Bay, I want to show you Fort Morgan. It sits right at the end of Fort Morgan Peninsula, which forms the southern edge of Mobile Bay. It's about a 20-mile scenic drive from Gulf Shores, and at times you can see that beautiful water on both sides of you. You know, with all the fighting over Mobile Bay, Fort Morgan was really an important spot because it guarded the entrance to the bay. The masonry fort that's there now was completed in 1834 and was severely damaged during the Civil War in, what else? The Battle of Mobile Bay in August of 1864. You may not know much about the battle, but I bet you know Admiral David Farragut's famous command, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." Well, after 2 weeks of fighting, the Union forces overtook the fort. From 1900 to 1923, it was America's largest permanent military outpost. Then it started to fall into disrepair, since our military, by that time, had far better ways of guarding our coasts. In 1960, it was proclaimed a National Historic Landmark, and things started to turn around. Much of the 479-acre fort had been revitalized. It's now open for tours, and you don't want to miss it. In fact, they offer candlelight tours during the months of June and July. And if you're really into history, you'll want to check out the Battle of Mobile Bay Civil War Trail. There's about a dozen sites along a 90-mile trail that talk about ship captains, fort commanders, and even common fighting men through first-hand accounts and illustrations. Okay, so I'm almost done with this whole water thing. But remember when I told you there was another body of water that seemed to be the same as Mobile Bay? Well, that was Bon Secure Bay, which actually means safe harbor. Safe because early fishermen were far enough into protected waters when they hit Bon Secure Bay that they felt, you guessed it, they felt safe. The reason I wanted to end with this one is because I think there's a great business idea here. We all know how important salt is to humans, right? We have to have a certain amount of salt to survive. And before refrigeration, they had to have salt to preserve food, especially meat and fish. And we all know how important food is to humans, well, especially me. Well, if you were a country at war, like for instance the North fighting the South during our own Civil War, what better way to cripple your enemy than to cut off their salt supply? That's exactly what the North did. Most of the United States salt came from Europe or the West Indies at the time. And the northern states, at least before the war, used to trade it to the southern states for cotton, but not after the war started. General Sherman proclaimed salt a contraband and created blockades to keep the South from getting any. That created what's known as the Salt Famine of 1862. So the determined opponents decided to make their own salt right here at Bone Secure Bay. First, they'd dig out holes along the coast and let the water settle in. Then they'd boil off the water to leave just the salt. That salt was so valuable that it sold for as much as $90 a bushel. Okay, so now here's my business idea. You know how an enterprising person will make a 50-cent bar of soap out of local materials and then charge $5 for that trendy bar of soap? Well, I think we could start making salt again right here at Bone Secure Bay. We call it authentic Civil War salt and charge about $20 a pound. Call me. Business ideas can definitely cause a lot of changes in any area, and that's happened right here along the Alabama coast over the years. You might want to think people have always come here for this. Nope. Way before they came for this, they came for this. Yep, the trees. This area was covered with oak, magnolia, cedar, and pine trees. It's estimated that in 1630, trees covered 29 million acres of land in this state. Wise businessmen seized the opportunity and started to set up lumber mills. It was a great spot because it's so close to Mobile Bay with all of its rivers flowing in. Plus, Mobile's shipbuilding industry needed the wood. And the lumber could be shipped anywhere by way of the Gulf. A lot of it went to Cuba, Europe, and South America. The lumber industry was strong for many years. In 1901, Alabama produced more than 1 billion board feet of lumber. Well, we all know that business and conservation can be at odds once in a while. By the 1920s, so much of the land had been clear-cut that lumber companies had to move to new areas. Plus, here in southern Alabama, it was pretty obvious that clearing away all the trees wasn't such a good thing, especially when you needed protection from hurricanes once in a while. Alabama is still one of the most forested states in the country, but most of the lumber industry is now further north. Along with having all the pine trees came another industry, turpentining. Turpentine is made by refining the sap or resin from trees, especially pine trees. You also get tar and pitch, and all three of those things were needed for the wooden shipbuilding industry. Since there was an active shipbuilding industry nearby and there were millions of pine trees, it was a no-brainer. What better place to make turpentine than right here? Gail Graham from the Orange Beach Museum told me that a lot of people turpentine their trees.
The pine pitch that dripped from the trees were taken to Mobile and sold at the ship stores. And then they made medicine out of it, and they made turpentine for paint, which they still do. And it was just extra money.
Okay, turpentining is from cutting into the tree? How do you get turpentine from a tree?
They call it cat facing them. They take a hatchet and they cut the bark all the way down to the first layer, and then they put a pan underneath of it, and it drips into these little pots. And they drip better in the summer. They bleed really bad in the summer, and sometimes if a tree's big enough, they'll do it on both sides.
Turpentining was an active business here for a long time, but then died off along with the wooden shipbuilding industry.